Hi! Well, today I'm going to try and return a bowl that I did a while back, some cherry, that is extremely split, and it, well, extremely split, it's split, and warped. So I want to return it and fill some of the voids with epoxy. Make sure this is soundly chucked in position, and look to try and get this a bit more uniform than it currently is at the moment. As the edge is quite warped, I'm just truing that up first with a 1/2 inch bowl gouge before tackling the rest of the bowl and making it a bit thinner. This has been drying for about 9 months. I'm having to be careful even at this stage because the splits are starting to open up a bit more, and it'll be very easy to get a catch if I don't keep that bevel rubbing. And now time to tackle the inside. The reason that there's a knob in the middle is that this was done with the bowl saver, so there's 2 other cherry small flat bowls lurking at the back of the box for me to also turn. So now it's just a question of turning out the inside of the bowl, again being quite mindful of those cracks. And with the inside looking a bit more uniform now and a bit smoother, I'm just going to now true up the outside before I do any more thinning down. There's a bit of a bulge on the outside, so I need to try and take that down to a slightly sweeter profile. So I don't want to thin this down too much initially because I want to make sure it all holds together. So what I'm going to do is to get the Dremel out with the carbides and the carbide cutters and the small saber tooth cutters, and open up those cracks so they're a bit more substantial and a bit more meaningful, and then think about filling them up. I also thought it a good idea to leave the bowl a bit thicker than the final form, because after I've slathered it in epoxy glue, I've got to return it and I'll probably make a complete mess of it. So at least that way I've got about another 3 or 4 mil I can afford to take out without it getting too thin. On all the routing out, I decided that I wanted to have quite a textured finish on the outside, but I forgot to film it. So what I did was I used the Dremel with the saber tooth spherical and the teardrop cutters, and I just randomly bounced around on the outside with all of that and created that sort of texture effect that you can see that I'm now covering up with masking tape, because I now need to cover up the holes on the outside as I'm going to start filling it with epoxy on the inside. So with it all relatively well masking taped up on the outside, I put my Simon Hope wood carving jig on the banjo and just going to put the chuck on that. That'll make it easier for me to put the glue in and apply it without it running everywhere. So I'm using the cheap epoxy glue from Poundland and also some cheap mica pigments from Amazon, which come in a whole load of different 10-gram bottles, different colours, not for not much money. It's similar to Pearlex. Pearlex is a very nice product, but these are so much cheaper. and I don't do that much of this, that it's worth spending a load of money on the bigger bottles that Perlex come in. So anyway, there's going to be quite a lot of the glue used because there's quite a lot of cracks. So mix it up and put a small amount of the mica powder in. I'm doing a sort of goldy, a yellowy colour and an orangey colour. I want the glue to be coloured so that you would be able to see through it with a strong light. So you could put a load more pigment in, I suspect, and it would become quite non-translucent. But this is all an experiment. You have to remember when you're doing this that the glue goes off quickly, but it's also quite mobile when you first mix it, as you can see. So it will flow and flow out of the crack and go all over the piece. I think it might be a good idea to, as one of my other wood turning friends has suggested, to actually put masking tape either side of each crack, so that when you actually overfill it, you just peel the masking tape off with the excess glue and the glue hasn't stuck to the wood. And although this was suggested, I just didn't bother, and as a result it took me more time than it would have done if I had put it on. The other thing that I think it would be good to do is to make sure that when you fill in the cracks that you can adjust the bowl so that it's pretty much horizontal for the cracks that you're filling, and do it in stages, and then that way the glue won't tend to flow out of the cracks that you've just put it into. So as ever, being impatient and just slathering it on seemed to be the way forward, but the net result is that it probably took longer than it needed to because it was flowing out as fast as it was going in. It goes off very quickly though, so there's a time point after about 3 or 4 minutes when it starts to go tacky, and you can, if you catch it just right, work that epoxy glue into the cracks just as it starts to go off, but then it very quickly changes and then you can't move it at all. So it doesn't take long for it to actually harden, just leaving it about 5-15 minutes, something like that, seemed to do it. I'm now trying some copper powder mixed with some of the orange mica powder into the glue, just to try and create some slightly different tones in different parts of the crack filling. I didn't find that mixing the copper powder in made any difference to the glue. It still seemed to mix absolutely fine and went off in approximately the same amount of time. I do think though, as you can probably see there, that the reduced amount of mica seemed to allow the glue to be more mobile, so it was flowing a bit more with the copper powder in it. It might have just been the workshop had heated up a bit, I don't know, but it was certainly moving about and a bit runny. So there we have it, epoxy everywhere. I did try to push it well into the cracks to try and get it down to the bottom, but as you'll probably see in a minute when I take the masking tape off, I wasn't completely successful, so there are some bubbles and air voids that need a top up at the bottom as well.
Some of this. Let's see how it worked out. Well, that was relatively successful. The cracks that have gone all the way through have at least got some filler in, and some of it's gone through reasonably well. So I'll now mix up some more glue and fill these cracks up.
So some more glue into the cracks from the outside and also into the bubbles. You can see there that from the texturing that I also used a mini grinding wheel on the Dremel, so that's why I've got lots of little slash cuts. And then whilst that was drying, I went round with the super glue and treated some of the cracks that had not fully stabilised around the bowl. So I have now got to turn off the excess epoxy on the inside and the outside. So I think I'm going to be needing to retexture the outside again. So first just dressing the edge before repositioning the tool rest and recutting the inside to remove the excess epoxy. Didn't film that bit, but it was just a nice sharp 3/8 inch bowl gouge and it trimmed the surface quite easily. I also had to recut the outside of the bowl to remove the excess epoxy, which took off most of the texturing that was there. And also I had to do a little top up with some air bubbles on a couple of occasions as well. So there was 3 or 4 phases of little bits of epoxy glue done on this. But I managed to get quite a nice finish on the inside. There is the odd air bubble, but I decided that I'm just going to leave those as a feature. So now I've got these sort of different tones of coppery orangey fill, which I'm quite pleased about. Now going to nacre it completely with the Dremel, because this isn't going to be perfect. Those little air bubbles are still going to be there. I got bored with the idea of filling them anymore. So let's just distress it and whack loads of colour on. That'll do. And those orangey coloured stripes have now inspired me to think of this as my tiger bowl. So I've got the Dremel set up and I started off using the round sabre tool, just sort of bouncing the ball all over the place in a random pattern just to get some texturing in. And then just to roughen up the surface a little bit, I thought I'd try that with the lathe running at a slow speed, about 300 or 400 revs. And that creates some interesting sort of skittery, scritchy, scratchy sort of effects. So I thought, well, I'll carry on with that and just do some sort of wobbly, random, squirrely type effects with the lathe this time not moving. So just trying to make sure there's a bit of texture over most places, and then a quick sand up with some 180 240 and a 400 NIWeb. So I don't want to colour the inside of the bowl, I want that to remain as it is. I want the outside now to be, based on my tiger theme, some sort of blotchy, orangey type effect. So I'm starting off with some burnt orange from the Hampshire Sheen intrinsic range, just blobbed on where appropriate.
Right, so flame now.
So with the flame on, I then wanted to get some colour into the base of those textures. So I decided to now use some honey colour to just puff into those bottom areas. Slightly yellowy effect. And I think the combination of those 3 colours is beginning to look quite good. Just splashing it around, filling it up so that you can see that it's wood, but I want it to look that camouflagey, sort of tigery colour. Getting there. And by making sure that the airbrush was pointing away from the inside of the bowl, I've avoided getting any inside. I had also finished the inside to quite a high finish and coated it with some lacquer before I started doing the colouring on the outside. Forgot to mention that. So it did mean that any small amounts of overspray could just be wiped off. As the intrinsic range is water soluble, it's quite easy, I think, to just sort of wipe it off a sealed surface before it goes off completely. So at this point, in true Stuart Farini style, I thought, well, more is more. So I thought I'd take some of that top surface colour off a little bit so that I could get some more paints to play with. So just taking it down a bit so it's not quite so strong in colour, and then I'm going to get the Inca Gold paints out.
Right, never to be outdone, a bit of Inca Gold. This is goldy, orangey gold colour.
So that's just rubbed on randomly all over just to bring a bit of luster to the surface, just in blobs. When it dries out, because the Inca Gold is sort of like a waxy acrylic paint mix, I spritz it with a bit of water from a water bottle just to sort of make it flow a bit.
And then a bit of the Inca Gold lava. It dries out in the pot, so that's why I'm spraying a bit of water on it.
Same treatment as before, splosh it on, rub it into some of the grooves and leave it on the surface with others, and then using a rag, rub some bits in, and as you can see, the colour can get quite strong. I wanted it to be quite blotchy and subtle, so I'm just getting some wire wool and again pulling back some of that surface just to drop it back a little bit. And then abrade a few areas to bring some of the undercolour back up again, taking some of that red off because it felt a little bit too dominant. And then just a little bit more of the Inca Gold because I've taken a bit too much off, so just a little bit more and a few highlights dabbed around just to bring the colour back again. And then again knock it back a bit with a bit of wire wool, just trying to find a sort of tone that feels right and comfortable. So a quick wipe up of the inside to remove any of the overspray, and then time to go over the outside with cellulose sanding sealer aerosol spray.
Right, and a bit of cellulose sanding sealer spray on the outside.
So with all that sprayed off, there was a bit of overspray on the inside of the cellulose sanding sealer, so that was just gently buffed back with a bit of 400 to rekey the surface, and then some acrylic lacquer over all of it. After I put several coats of lacquer on, I did actually reverse the bowl and texture the bottom with a texturing tool, but as always lost the video. Hey ho.